Thunderbird, they would basically say to me, "Oh, don't install anything more because it'll slow down the system." And that kind of works in Microsoft's favor because they teach people don't install anything, just whatever is on Windows, and don't install anything else.
Well, actually, to be fair, in Windows, it can be kind of true, because how many applications have you seen being installed, or you've installed over the years yourself, that arrogantly decide, oh, I'm going to put myself into the startup menu, so that I'm going to run as soon as Windows starts, and I'm not even going to ask you about that. I'm going to do that for you. Like Nero, one of the ones at the office, they've got someone at some point installed a LightScribe burner onto the machine, and the application that was installed to use that decides it needs to run as soon as the computer reboots. It's sitting in the system tray. I don't know if they've ever burned a disk with it, but it decides to sit in the system tray. So it's all these little things that when you add them up, it's like when you install a driver for something in Windows, you find that you get 3 or 4 little flotillas of shareware applications that all want to start and all want to splatter your desktop with icons, trial versions of this, that, and the next thing. And they'll all add themselves onto the system tray, and all of that just eats RAM. So in Windows, in installing lots of stuff, you really have to, if you need to know about that first of all, and then to go in and do a custom install and say, look, I only want that application. I don't want all the rest of the Yahoo toolbar, and don't want any of that. I mean, that's one of the differences I put between Linux or free software or open source or whatever and Windows, is the fact that Windows both are made for their end users, or made for their customers. Sorry, the difference is that Windows customers were never you. Windows customers are other companies who then make programs and make drivers and make things for the end users to install on their system. You know, it's not made for, Windows is not made for the end user. They've got people convinced that the end user is who Microsoft are targeting. They're not. They're targeting companies. And Linux, because the software is made by people for the people, it's made essentially for that. So yeah.
If I could just chip in very quickly, just going back to what you said about the performance of Linux Mint, and it's funny you say it because I've had a few people say to me that like for like, comparing Ubuntu and Linux Mint side by side with the same type of applications running, that they feel that the performance of Linux Mint is a lot better. I mean, I don't know how scientific that is, but it just reminded me of that. I think it was a couple of users that mentioned that to me one time when I was looking and making comments about Mint. So I think that's I think I can see what you mean by when you said about the performance issue, and it seems to work better, faster.
As I say, I cannot figure out why. Logically, it shouldn't be, but it does. And
maybe it's. I mean, it could even come down to something psychological with the front end, just to play tricks on the mind. But whatever it was, they said virtually word perfect as to what you said, which is quite strange. It'd be very interesting if we could ever find an answer to that one. I think
it's the Yoda factor. It's the green. The power of the green.
But sorry, Roy. Are there any other points you want to put to Gordon? Because while I've got him on, I've got a couple of other
trying to find an explanation for it, and the only thing comes to mind now. I'm trying to think of the Phoronix comparisons, and it's more based around graphics and command line compression and things like that. And as far as I could tell, the previous ones it did with usually Fedora and Ubuntu, and in some cases it was doing Mandriva, but probably won't do it now. It was quite comparable, and I think in some cases Ubuntu was faster than Fedora. So it kind of surprises me. It kind of means that if Ubuntu was pretty fast, and contrary to some people who might say things about Ubuntu being heavy or not optimized, or If Mint is really faster than Ubuntu, and I think then Phoronix might want to do a benchmark of that, just put it on the one of the boxes and try and run that too. But he doesn't have a. I've always, since like 2007, when he was doing some benchmarks with David Lin, who no longer works with him. He was in the early days he would just run command line things. He would barely do any 3D. And I told him, well, you have to do all kinds of a mixture of things that simulate the actual use, because people don't just sit there and compress files and sit and watch the screen and see which one ends up faster, because he was measuring mostly the kernel performance or the interaction with the drive and all that sort of stuff. It's just very CPU intensive things. But I wonder if it's something to do maybe with how they distribute the desktop environment. Maybe if both use by default or the main distribution use the GNOME desktop. I'm just wondering if maybe Ubuntu adds something to it. I don't think they have done that quite yet.
I mean, it, like I say, it could just turn out to be one of these psychological reasons that for whatever reason aesthetically it tricks the mind into thinking it's running quicker. A bit like some of the tricks that Windows 7's alleged to do to make users think it runs faster than XP. It could be that, but like I say, I did have a couple of people say exactly the same thing to me.
Yeah. One of the things I'll say about, sorry I interrupt, but one of the things that I found with Windows, people will try and do a comparison between the startup time of Linux and Windows, and they will not distinguish between the, first of all, they'll count the BIOS stage as a part of the test, which they really shouldn't, because it hasn't gotten to the operating system yet. And I've seen people do that. And in the case of Linux, I had this thing with one of the person I was installing Linux for a few days ago. He would basically look at a stopwatch, and he would start when you have the bootloader. And I'm like, no, that's the bootloader. You haven't actually started the operating system. It is giving you a few seconds to decide. And anyway, eventually he starts it from the point where he gets that the operating system starting after the bootloader. And then there is the separation between the desktop environment and the login screen and all that. But what happens with Windows, it gives you the illusion you actually go into the desktop very fast. But then it can spend like half a minute or a minute depending on how many things you have installed. And it's doing all this, all this nonsense in the background, starting all kinds of applications and processes and maybe bringing all kinds of pop-ups and things. But you still feel like you already are in the desktop. And I found with Linux it doesn't quite do that. When I start KDE, it already has most of the things there, with the tasks open, and it doesn't give you this illusion that you've already finished when actually you have this thing working in the background, and you can barely even, when you hit the, in the case of Windows, you hit the start menu, and sometimes you'd have to wait like 10 seconds because it's busy doing something else.
I think that's one of the reasons why I think Microsoft or Windows appeals to office or drones and like office workers, people who are just doing a job because they don't like their job, but it pays the wages. So they can then say, right, you know what, I'll just start the computer and then I'll go into the canteen, I'll get a coffee. And 5 minutes later, by the time they come back with their coffee, maybe they went out for a smoke as well, and by the time they come back in, then their desktop's ready to start work. And with the fact that it has to reboot quite regularly to do updates and all of that. I mean, that's what I don't understand is when you see a Windows update and it says it may have to reboot. What do you mean may have to reboot? Everything Windows does needs a reboot. And that, to me, is a productivity thing. I mean, Roy, you're right, and you're saying that the desktop, the Windows desktop it gives you the impression that you're actually ready to work when you're not, because it's still loading a lot of stuff. Even although you can see your wallpaper, you can see your taskbar, and you can gradually see the system tray filling out with different icons.
Antivirus as well, then it comes up with some sort of splash screen.
Yeah, and then on XP you've got the regular little bubble messages that keep popping up. It's found such and such a device. Oh, congratulations, that was never unplugged. It's downloading the driver. What do you mean downloading the driver? You already had the driver. Oh, it's ready to use. Oh, thank you. I used it yesterday, but thanks for telling me. So. But yeah, you're right. I mean, with Linux, the only time that I've seen that kind of effect in Linux is on my old desktop running a live CD, and the only reason for that is because it's old. It's not got very much in the way of RAM. It has to shunt a lot of things around to actually use a live CD. That's all that is. If it was a modern